Just trying the microphone. Hi, Brian. Thank you. There you go. Now you can hear me better. You should have protested. Sorry. Okay. Good. Okay. Last week we briefly touched upon the relationship of art from the Baroque era and Catholic Counter-Reformation. I would like to expand on my remarks from last Thursday and begin tonight's reflection with a review of the impact of Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Church's response, termed the Counter-Reformation, on art in the 16th and 17th century. These two events, the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation, transformed the religious, political, and artistic landscape in Europe forever. The Protestant Reformation began with the German Augustinian monk Martin Luther, pinning his 95 Theses on the doors of the Wittenberg Cathedral in 1517, protesting corruption in the Catholic Church. This led to the split of Christianity into Roman Catholics and Protestants, particularly in Scandinavia, the Low Countries, i.e. the Netherlands and Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany. In contrast, most of France, Spain, and Portugal remained predominantly Catholic. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in 1440 and its widespread use by the 1480s enabled the rapid spread of Protestantism during or through the writings of Martin Luther, John Calvin, and others. Many of these reformers rejected the creation and use of images for worship. Thus, large-scale works of biblical art were no longer authorized by Protestant church bodies. Some Protestants continued to commission artworks from artists such as Rembrandt for personal and more reflection depicting Christian messages. However, overall, the rise of Protestant Reformation was associated with relentless attacks against Catholic churches, all kinds of church art, and the work of Catholic artists across Europe in the 16th century. And that's called the Protestant iconoclasm. Many reformers encouraged the removal and often the destruction of pictures and sculptures which had filled the medieval churches. These attacks are known as the Great Iconoclasm, or iconoclastic fury. In a single year, in 1566, Protestant iconoclasts destroyed an estimated 90% of church art in the Netherlands. And here on your left, you can see a drawing of how iconoclasts would go about. They would pull sculptures or paintings off the walls, destroy the frescoes, and then many times things were burned. And here on your right, this is the facade of a French church, and all the saint sculptures had been pulled down and destroyed. The Catholic Church, through Pope Paul III, initiated the Council of Trent in 1545. To develop and energize the Church's response to the Reformation. The Council of Trent, the most important event of the Catholic Counter-Reformation, represented the Church's principal pushback on the advancing Protestant Reformation. The primary determinations of the Council were to refute and reverse the beliefs of the Protestant reformers, promote traditional Catholic beliefs through improved education and preaching of the clergy and bishops, to eliminate financial abuses, and to enhance the liturgy, music, and the art. The Catholic Church strongly believed in the educational and inspirational power of visual art, commissioning large numbers of paintings, which were to teach, delight, and persuade the viewer of the message of God. The Council of Trent promoted a number of guidelines to be followed in the production of religious architecture, paintings, and sculptures. Catholic Counter-Reformation art strove to highlight theological differences between Catholicism and Protestantism, focusing on distinctive aspects of Catholic dogma, such as the Immaculate Conception, the Annunciation of the Virgin, and the Transfiguration of Christ. The art commissioned by the Catholic Church was to explicitly portray Christ's suffering and agony on the cross, celebrate the Eucharist and the role of the Virgin Mary as well as the saints. Additional aspects of Catholic Counter-Reformation art were a direct and compelling depiction of biblical narratives in paintings and sculptures, and the encouragement of piety through these works. Artists were emboldened to render their works understandably and relevant to ordinary people, many of whom were illiterate. Thus, art, which we categorize as Baroque art, is almost synonymous with Catholic Counter-Reformation art in that period. Here we see two examples of many remarkable examples of Baroque architecture. It's St. Peter's Basilica and the Church of Gesù, both of them in Rome. In the following two slides, I will show you a clear difference between the use of art in Protestant churches versus Roman Catholic churches. This is the interior of a Protestant church, and as you can see, Protestant churches are in general, and most of the time, are void of pictures and statues with predominantly whitewashed walls. This is in stark contrast to Roman Catholic churches, following the initiation of the Counter-Reformation. Catholic reformers believed strongly in the educational and inspirational power of visual art. And Catholic churches are sumptuously decorated with frescoes, paintings, and sculptures, depicting the suffering of Christ as well as the life of the Virgin Mary and saints. And this is inside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And this is the inside of a Catholic church in Bavaria, which they really went over the top with throwing everything in there, and lots of gold too. Artists that were commissioned to produce works for the Counter-Reformation include, to name a few, Carracci, Rubens, and Bernini. And here I just picked one of a very typical piece of their work. So Annibale Carracci, Peter Paul Rubens, and Bernini, the sculptor. However, also Titian, Tintoretto, El Greco, and many others were producing works for the Catholic Church. The most recognized artist of the Counter-Reformation is Caravaggio, who was the artist of our first work of art of this evening. With this brief introduction of Catholic Counter-Reformation art, I would like to turn to our first painting of the evening, The Sacrifice of Isaac, created in 1603. And as I introduce the artist, you can follow along on the handout if that's helpful. Born Michelangelo Merisi, Caravaggio is the name of the artist's hometown in Lombardy in North Italy. Caravaggio was orphaned at a young age when his parents and grandparents died of the bubonic plague at the end of the 16th century. In 1592, at the age of 21, Caravaggio moved to Rome. He spent his first few years in Rome in poverty. His earliest known paintings are of individual figures with still lives. In 1602, he had established a reputation as a powerful, dramatic realist. But his lifestyle was causing equal attention and no little controversy. He appeared regularly in police records for fights and assaults. Eventually, the murder of an opponent forced him to flee Rome and live in Naples, Malta, and Sicily. In July 1610, the Pope granted Caravaggio a pardon. However, on his return journey to Rome, Caravaggio developed a fever and died on July 28, 1610, at the age of 38. Caravaggio's works were in the service of the Catholic Counter-Reformation as a response to the growing threat of Protestantism. Characterized by his dramatic, almost theatrical lighting, Caravaggio's paintings were controversial, popular, and hugely influential on succeeding generations of painters all over Europe. Caravaggio's painting technique was spontaneous. He painted straight onto the canvas with minimal preparation. His exceptional use of tenebrism and chiaroscuro was matched by his observational naturalism, which allowed for heightened intellectual and emotional engagement with the contemporary viewer. Much to the horror of his critics, Caravaggio used ordinary working people with irregular and rough, characterful faces as models for saints. And as you consider our first painting, I would like to quote from Genesis chapter 22, verses 11 and 12. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham looked up and saw a ram. So now let's have a closer look at this painting after I did all the talking. And as usual, I invite any one of you here to have a question, if you have a question or a comment or would like to reflect on anything. So this painting was actually commissioned by Cardinal Barberini, who later became Pope Urban VIII, and then now is in the Uffizi Museum in Florence in Italy. So just to maybe start, because very often we spend or look at works of art from the New Testament. So we're actually looking at the story of the Old Testament, and it's the time when Abraham was asked to sacrifice his only son, and we hear that reading usually on the second Sunday of Lent every third year.
I'm kind of struck by how graphic it is, and it seems Caravaggio is always pretty clear and not leaving much to the imagination. I mean, it's like when I think of Matteo or Matthew, yeah, all of those are very real. Yep. With the light, of course. But I'm very struck here by it's just kind of violent.
Correct. Yes. So he really, and I'm a little bit almost overdid following the call of the Catholic Church to not leave anything to someone's imagination, not to have to go through a great explanation as we did. We looked at the painting the first week where Jesus was tempted by the devil, and it took a long time to kind of work through it, and I really understand. This you understand right up front. There's not much left to imagination. Absolutely, yes.
I'm just struck by the way he captured the look on Isaac's face of fear and just disbelief and almost betrayal by his own father. That how can you be doing this to me? And it's almost scary. And in fact, it is scary.
It is, yeah. Oh no, it is in some way a terrifying painting. Until we unfold the story a little bit more, but just looking at it, absolutely. And yeah, so we have very typical from Caravaggio. We have one light source that falls on the face of Abraham, and then straight onto the face of Isaac. And I also feel some paintings will tell you a story within a painting. This is almost like photography. It catches one moment and one moment only. It is really that moment where Abraham was about to cut the throat of his son. And so it's almost like modern, like old style of photography, catching one moment.
Do you know if there were stories or writings that talked about subjects that the painter was using, like they had models or people trying to stand in a position for him to capture, or was he just straight from his own mind painting?
No, that's an excellent question. So Caravaggio used models. So he had models, and that's a very good point. So I zoomed into, so if we look at the face of Isaac, and then a while ago we looked at the Incredulity of St. Thomas, which was painted just roughly a year before. And if we look at this gentleman in the back, so he would also reuse the same model in his paintings. So he had a couple of either friends or neighbors or people he got to know, and they were willing to sit for him, basically. Yes, and they were ordinary people. So yes, thank you for that question, actually. And just it struck me last week, we looked at a painting by Murillo, and Father Mann said that he felt that St. Joseph and the Virgin Mary looked very much alike. And I think that was an observation of yours, which is good and personal. However, if we look very closely at the face of Isaac and the face of the angel, do you see anything there? They are very similar too. So that is actually an assistant in Caravaggio's workshop, and he used them for both. He just changed a little bit the face, but it's actually the same person he used as a model for both of the figures. Yes.
I'm trying to get a sense for where in the story Abram is at, because it's not a look of relief on his face, I don't think. And is it the angel just saying, okay, Abraham, and he's, now what? But I would have expected at that point, if you don't have to do this horrible thing, you would have seen a look of relief on his face. So maybe we're earlier in the story on that?
I think he's just surprised. Again, I think the analogy of it's the moment. He's probably also caught off guard. I mean, it wasn't easy what he was asked to do. And then the angel really touches him. And I also zoomed in on the hands. I think the hands even it's a painting, we don't hear words, but I think the hands are telling a story. So if we look at the hand of the angel, he really grabs Abraham's hand to not leave any doubt. That's okay, you're done. So, and I think that reflects on the face a little bit. Abraham is kind of caught in that motion. And then equally, just to the hands of Abraham. Again, strong working hands. And then if we think of the Old Testament, they were giving sacrifice many times. And this is again, he knew what he was doing, if you know what I mean. He had sacrificed an animal before. He had gone through a sacrifice. So he wasn't, unfortunately, Isaac wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah, I was focusing more on the hand holding the blade and how it looks like it has not released in that moment. But I guess, as you were just pointing out, his left hand must be with such a grip that it's causing the distress that Isaac thought that this is not some kind of momentary insanity or practical joke, or that it was a serious threat.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And if we think about it for a little bit further, so we see the hand of the angel, we see the hands of Abraham. We don't see Isaac's hands because they were bound. So he was the lamb to be sacrificed. He had no way of defending himself. But then there it also is. There is the real lamb that should be sacrificed. And I think that's also beautiful in this painting. And I think that's now the second step. So the painting itself depicts the cruelty of the story. And I think we all wrestle with that. When we hear it in Mass, you kind of step back and you think, what's happening here? Well, how can God ask us or Abraham to do this? But then I think we need to take that next step in faith, because there's also, it says, God will provide for us. And God provided the lamb that should be sacrificed.
The lamb looks kind of like a pig.
Like a pig? Yeah, it's certainly like a cute lamb. Yeah, here they're kind of curled out there to the side. So these are his ears over here, one ear, and then this is a horn.
When I first saw the ram, I thought he looked at him like, "Don't do it to him. It's my turn to be taken." He just kind of looks like,
yeah, yeah.
Don't do it, don't do it.
So theologians, speak about the I of the human person. So like really when I have an identity, it's the I. And scripture scholars would say that this is the moment that the human person received their I with the obedience of Abraham. Mm-hmm. That it really changed the whole sense of humanity. Adam and Eve, now we're in a new beginning, and that beginning is the beginning of the I, of the identity of humanity.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I had to come out of my hole for this one. But I just had a question about maybe Caravaggio and his philosophy on human nature, because a lot of the paintings and the works that I see don't have like a catchlight in the eye. Like you look at a lot of other portraiture in art, and there's clearly a catchlight or some sort of light in people's eye, and this seems like heavily focused on, well, the way that he paints the eyes, they're very dark. There's no sort of light or life coming from the eye, and so it feels very Augustinian, Calvinistic, just very that human nature is bad or flawed. And maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen many works where there is any sort of life in the eye for Caravaggio.
Okay.
So I wondered if you know the answer to that.
No, I haven't necessarily come across. I wouldn't. So you say in all of it, or all of his paintings, or specifically in this one?
This one, the other examples that you've shown, the eyes are all dark. Everyone's eyes are dark.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to add to the scene too, that it's like not a very pleasant thing that you're looking at. Or Thomas doubting or sticking his finger is also, in a sense, violent in what it's showing. But everyone's eyes are just really like an abyss.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of leaves me feeling, like, I guess, weird.
Yeah,
About the term.
I need to think about that. Yes.
A couple of things. One was, I guess I probably made a wrong assumption about the universality of certain gestures, because I would expect the angel not to be pointing, but to be like, stop, as if stop meant that gesture. And so quite possibly that was not understood to mean stop back in 1600. But do you know offhand, you mentioned that he had been arrested a number of times for fighting.
Yes.
Was he a knife fighter? Did he coach this model on, possibly?
Yeah, unfortunately, he has been found to attack other people with knives. Yes. So he definitely knew how to use a knife. That's for sure. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. I mean, he attacked a waiter because he believed his food was undercooked, and he was rough, very rough.
I'm just curious about the background. There's a lot going on in the foreground, but there's like a good third of the painting is background, and there's stuff in it, and I wonder about it just because I keep looking back there. I'm like, there's a building back there.
Yeah, and yes, so, and it's mostly, this would be very familiar to everyone who has traveled through Italy outside of Rome. So it's a very Italian environment with the tall green trees and the type of the buildings. And it's more so quite often in Caravaggio's paintings we have what we call tenebrism. So it's just kind of a murky, black, unspecific background because he wants to set it into any moment in time. Here he did choose to give it a kind of a landscape background, but again, kind of with the Counter-Reformation, it was very much the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church asked the artist to create images of a biblical story set into a setting that the contemporary viewer could recognize. So through the teaching of, for example, St. Francis of Assisi and also Ignatius of Loyola, which Ignatius exercises, they specifically asked the worshipper, as we were reading the biblical stories, to put ourselves into those stories and not just see them as things that happened in the past and they're just kind of fun. I mean, they're kind of stories. Ignatius and St. Francis of Assisi really asked us, and that was taken up by the Catholic Church during the Counter-Reformation, to create images that would pull us, the viewer, into the scene and really make it feel like this could happen today. This is part of my life. And so that's why he set it into, at that point, contemporary Italian landscape. Yeah. Yes. Need to move on. And so, yeah, I think just to kind of wrap this up, the painting is terrifying. It's a snapshot of that one moment, and I think it's very direct, as the Catholic Church asked artists to do. And also, we are right there. I mean, many times paintings are kind of set back, and you kind of look onto them, and they don't touch you much, but we could be, I mean, as I could be standing right here, and I could be part of this event, and I think this is very important. But to look forward, so again, Jesus, if we believe and if we trust in our faith, Christ and God will provide for us. He will provide. And it also foreshadows that he himself gave up his only son. Yes, he asked Abraham to sacrifice his own son, his only son. But then he stopped him. But God himself sacrificed his only son for us, for our sins. And so I think that's kind of not going beyond the scariness. It is actually a very telling story, and if we in the Bible, and if we can see beyond the cruelness of it in the first instance. And before we move on to the next painting, I will leave you with this question. In the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, emphasizes the importance of obedience and trust in God. And so I asked myself, do I trust in God to provide for me during life's challenges? Our second painting tonight is by the exceptional Dutch painter, printmaker, and draftsman Rembrandt. It is entitled The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, painted in 1633. And again, I will introduce the artist just briefly. Rembrandt was born in Leiden, Holland in 1606. He received his artistic training in Leiden as well as in Amsterdam, the most prosperous port in Northern Europe at the time. Because of trade with many European countries, Rembrandt was exposed to works from antiquity as well as the more fashionable artistic styles of the day through prints and reproductions. Particularly the dramatic use of light in Caravaggio's paintings was influential on many of Rembrandt's works from the 1630s. Rapidly, Rembrandt became a highly regarded and prolific painter. His works range from portraits to scenes from the Bible. His famous self-portraits helped create a story of his life while demonstrating his humble and sincere nature. His biblical representations showed his knowledge while also providing a glimpse into his compassion for humanity. Despite never having left his home country, Rembrandt's works became internationally recognized and celebrated. He was one of the leading artists in the Dutch Golden Age, a period of exceptional creativity, prosperity, military proofs, and scientific discovery that took place in Holland during the 17th century. Rembrandt's personal life was filled, however, with much sadness and many difficulties. Although his wife Saskia gave birth to 4 children, only his son Titus survived into adulthood. While Titus was still an infant, Saskia died at the age of 30. Rembrandt found himself repeatedly in financial troubles. Rembrandt's death occurred within 1 year of his son's death in October 1669. The great master died a pauper and was interred in an unmarked grave in Amsterdam. And for this painting, I would like to quote from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 39 and 40. He said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And so, yes, with this, maybe just to give a quick background. So it's obviously the biblical story that's, as mentioned in Mark, but also Matthew and Luke. It's the 12 apostles or disciples are with Jesus on a boat, crossing, it's a lake, Galilee, but they call it the sea, I think, because it's pretty big. And so there's a sudden storm coming up. And Jesus was in the back of the boat, sleeping. And we see kind of, in this picture, we see the different responses to that storm. Yeah. And I think, is anyone familiar with the painting? No? I think Bishop Barron, Word on Fire, has used this a couple of times. I think maybe last year with some of the publications they had sent out. So I thought it would be, if someone had maybe seen it but hasn't followed up, it would be of interest to kind of help explain what we're looking at.
I find it interesting in looking at Rembrandt's dates that he was quite young, but from Leiden, where the pilgrims left from within a few years of his own birth, because he left from Leiden in 1620.
Right.
And so he was already a young man. And it's just interesting to me that those folks that were in Leiden were there because they were not accepted in England for their religious beliefs. They had left England, and those are the folks that came here in 1620.
Right.
From Leiden.
Yes. So I think for him, the reason to leave Leiden and to move to Amsterdam was mostly for financial reasons. Leiden compared to Amsterdam was rather small. And Amsterdam was an international port. So I think he just saw for him a better chance to develop as an artist and have a greater base to call in commissions. I think that was, for him personally, his main reason to go to Leiden. And since we were talking about Catholics and Protestant, he was a Protestant. So he would paint, as I say, so it's not 100% black and white, right? I mean, Catholics are all into art and Protestants, no art at all. So obviously, the world doesn't work like this. Still, some of the Protestants, as I mentioned earlier, would commission personal works. And that certainly kind of falls into that category. People would decorate their houses with works of art. And if we think of works from the Netherlands, they would paint everyday scenes, but there would be a moral story in it that we could kind of work out if we would pay attention to it. So maybe just kind of look at this a little bit, as I like to analyze the paintings. So if we use the mast, first of all, it represents a cross. Again, even though if someone would not be familiar with the biblical story, one might not see that, but then, since we certainly know the biblical story, but then also when you start analyzing the painting, it does become apparent that there is an underlying religious identity in this painting. So the mast forms a cross. And then I also drew these lines because they all also convert in the center here, and then it's hard to, there's a flag, and there's also a cross on the flag. So kind of he uses these techniques to break down the picture. And then also he uses the technique, particularly the mast, to divide the painting in kind of a lighter area, if we kind of look here, and a darker area. And I kind of zoomed into this a little bit and see what your response is to that.
I think sometimes it's easy to look at the apostles and say, oh, okay, you got upset about a storm. How big a deal was it? If Jesus asked me, oh, ye of little faith, and I'm looking at that wave, I'm going, did you see that wave? I mean, so this is probably a depiction of that storm that's a much more violent one than I'd ever seen before, and it just kind of puts it in perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, so absolutely. So it's definitely, and I haven't been on Lake Galilee, so I don't even know if really big waves like that could come up. But he definitely exaggerated this moment. And we don't know the exact identity of the individual disciples, but art historians would believe that it was probably Peter, Andrew, James, and John who were in the front because they were fishermen. So they probably, they were actually trying to get control of the boat, and they probably were the most skillful, so you would want them to be in the front of the boat. There's some discussion if maybe this could be Peter, or this person over here could be Peter. This one, again, it's at the helm of the boat, and then he sits on something, maybe like the rock. Peter's the rock of the church. Others were thinking that this could be Peter because there's a little knife hanging out on the side of him, and that's kind of this foretelling of the story when Jesus was captured by the soldiers, and then Peter pulls his sword and cuts off the ear of one of the soldiers. Yes. Did that good?
If the mast was supposed to represent the cross, maybe those guys represent at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified.
Yes.
Just a thought.
No, absolutely no, and that's a very good thought. And oopsie, actually here, one of the disciples actually really hanging on to the cross. And then again, art historians have interpreted that as John the Beloved, because he was the one who was at the cross when Jesus was crucified. So yeah, no, absolutely, very good, very good. Maybe just going onto this side, and I know my husband is already getting nervous because I'm running over time.
To me, the painting is absolutely stunning.
Yes.
And part of it is the light contrast. The very white of the sea crashing against the boat,
Yep.
and the very dark of the cloud. Then the sky, where it's starting to open up.
Yes.
And to me, that just says a lot about things.
It is a gorgeous, and in some sense it's so famous, and then sometimes people don't know, but it has a instant recognition factor built in because, yes, of all these elements. Yes, just kind of quickly so Jesus is in the back of the boat and he was sleeping, and we see the different responses of the disciples here in the back. One is actually pulling Jesus. He's really violently waking him up. He's like, and it's the word, "Don't you care that we perish?" So we see that. One of the disciples is praying. One of the disciples is pointing out onto the waves and really pointing out to the waves. And Jesus, can you see the waves? We're really in danger here. You have to do something. And then it's all this beautiful expression of the different emotions that people have in a situation like this. And just so this over here, this disciple is actually Rembrandt himself. So he very often included himself into the paintings. And it's kind of beautiful to see. He is a bit ambivalent about the situation. He's holding the hand to his head, to his cap. He's holding on to one of the reins here. And I think he really, as I mentioned in the introduction, he had a very hard life. This is still early in his life, and he didn't know of the many things that would come his way. But I think he does express, we have to hold on. We have to hold on to our faith. We have to hold on to God And at the end of the day, he will get us through this wave, through the storm, through the situation that I'm in. And frankly, quite often I can't really do anything. I mean, we're just the sailors in the front, they're trying hard, but maybe they're not really making a difference. At the end of the day, we kind of have to sail through. We have to unfortunately move on. Just a quick story about this painting. It used to be in the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. But actually just pretty much exactly 2 days ago, 35 years ago, 2 men dressed as policemen entered the museum saying that something was going wrong, and they had received an alarm, and they entered the building, they tied up the security guards and spent 80 minutes in the museum, and they stole 13 works of art. And one of them was Rembrandt's The Storm at the Sea of Galilee, and none of the 13 works that were stolen have reappeared. So they're all still missing. So that's but the museum decided to leave the empty frames. So if you go to the museum, you will see the empty frames of the 13 works of art that were taken in 1990. So before we move on to the next one, I will leave you with this question, which is kind of similar because I think all the 3 works of art have a very similar theme. And the question is, will I have faith in God when I am challenged and fearful? The third and last work of art of this evening is The Return of the Prodigal Son, painted in 1773 by Pompeo Battoni, the leading portrait painter of the 18th century in Rome. Pompeo Battoni was born in 1708 in Lucca, Tuscany, the son of a distinguished goldsmith. In 1727, Battoni moved to Rome to study painting. He advanced his study by copying antique sculptures in the Vatican, as well as admiring frescoes by Raphael and the Carracci brothers. He developed into an exquisite history painter, mainly of religious subjects, opting for the classicizing manner of painting. As such, Battoni is considered a precursor of neoclassicism. Battoni received numerous commissions for religious compositions. His most renowned commission was the decoration of one of the altars in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome in 1746. By the 1750s, Battoni had also become a celebrated portraitist and was highly thought after, particularly by British aristocracy, as they traveled through Rome on their grand tour. He painted his sitters besides classical statues and often with Roman buildings shown in the background. In addition to art-loving aristocrats, Battoni's sculpture subjects included the kings and queens of Poland, Portugal, and Prussia, the Holy Roman Emperors Joseph II and Leopold II, the popes Benedict XIV, Clemens XIII, and Pius VI, Elector Karl Theodor of Bavaria, and many more. His late years were affected by declining health. He died in Rome in 1787 at the age of 79, and he was buried at his parish church of Santa Lorenzo in Lucina. And for this work, I would like to quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verse 20. His father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And so we have a few minutes to kind of reflect on this painting, which I think is absolutely just gorgeous. Since we have talked about Rembrandt before, and we have talked about the famous The Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt, but I think this is equally beautiful.
One of the things, when I think of Rembrandt's, this focus is so often, it seems, on the Father. I mean, the Son comes to the recognition that he's poor, and his poverty leads him to the embrace of mercy. But what I love about this is it's very dramatic, the repentantness, the way that the Son repents.
Mm-hmm.
It's more visible, it seems to me. It's really very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he bows forward. His hands are clasped in prayer and in asking for forgiveness, and it almost feels like he's leaning into the Father. I mean, there's this leaning in and asking for an embrace and for forgiveness. Yes. Yeah.
I think just the action by the Father of taking his cloak and starting to put around him just seems so touching and
Yes.
compassionate and welcoming.
Yeah. Yeah, you see his right hand opening up, and you can, if we would look at the movie for another few seconds, he would embrace his son with the cloak. Yes.
I'm just wondering how hard it is to paint. Like he did phenomenal job of painting emotion in the Son. Like it's so clear the emotion there, but the emotion in the Father's face leaves me hanging because all I can think is, isn't he supposed to be like weeping and joyful and sad because his son is destitute, but he's here, which is wonderful. Like I want to see a lot more emotion, and he seems like I see it in his arms, right? But like, it's not in his face. Is that hard to paint?
I can see that. Well, he turns his eyes down in compassion, I think. I mean, there's not like, as you say, he's not crying, and it is definitely a reserved response, but I think a loving and embracing response. Nevertheless, yes. Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful contrast in some way as well between the Son, who clearly has gone through very difficult times. He's just wearing rags. He actually, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look closer, he has a little bowl wrapped around his hip, and that's probably his only possession, and he's hoping to fill that once in a while with a little bit of food. I mean, so it's really representing the poverty that he has come out of, and from the situation he has turned around to repent and return to God. And then that obviously is in contrast with the Father in his beautiful colored cloak. It's fur trimmed, beautiful clothing. But then again, it's kind of, if we look at the arms, and sometimes of course we want to see something, but it is also, again, it's a kind of a cross. It's the red color of the blood. So there's a lot of symbolism in that painting as well. So because if we think we're moving on a little bit, we are leaving the Baroque period, and some artists bring in more symbolism again than compared to Caravaggio, just kind of circle back. That was so instant. I mean, you don't need anyone to explain to you what these things mean.
I can't help but think, first of all, I'm fascinated by the notion of the art serving such a specific purpose as a rebuttal of sorts, or standing up to the Protestants. And I can't help but think of this in the context of editorial cartoonists who would take this and they would slap a tattoo on the young man's shoulder that said Protestant to make it more obvious.
And who knows, maybe that exists, because as we know, nothing is new under the sun, and quite often artists would look back into the work of others. As we heard, like Rembrandt, he was familiar with the works of Caravaggio, so he would implement elements into his work, and very much the painter as well, he uses that contrast which we mentioned earlier. There's no background whatsoever. It's a pitch black, actually, so it doesn't even tenorism. Tenorism is more kind of murky, and you might want to, this is pitch black. It's really highlighting those two figures and their embrace, make that very powerful. Yes, and I would like to, and there's much more to say about this, but just my final thought on this, and to end our reflection today, is Henry Nouwen, a Dutch Catholic priest, once said, while reflecting on the story of the return of the prodigal son, and he has written the book, some of you might be familiar with that, and there's some online kind of workshops almost. You can follow the questions and help you to go through the book and dive deeper into its writing, but also into Rembrandt's painting. However, so he says, and I quote, "Accepting love, forgiveness, and healing is often much harder than giving. And so do I believe in the unconditional love of God if I repent and return to him." And that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for coming.